May Calloway had worked at Harmon Shipping and Logistics for 3 years, 2 months and 11 days, and in all that time not one person on the executive floor had learned her last name. That was fine. That was exactly how she wanted it. She was the woman who kept the books clean, the one who came in at 7 in the morning, before the cleaning crew finished, who left after dark when the last of the men in their expensive suits had gone home to wives who didn't ask questions. She knew which invoices to flag and which ones to let slide without comment. She knew that consulting fees meant something else entirely. She knew that the cold storage units on Pier 11 were never actually used for cold storage. May Calloway knew a great many things that could get her killed, and she had survived this long by being very, very good at pretending she didn't. She was 28 years old, 5'4", and the kind of woman who got described as comfortable-looking by people who were trying to be kind and forgettable by people who weren't. Her hips were wide, her arms soft, her face round and open, in a way that made strangers tell her things they probably shouldn't. She wore cardigans in muted colors. She kept her brown hair in a low bun. She had learned, very early, that invisibility was a skill, and she had refined it into an art form. In a building full of men who were paid to notice things, not one of them had ever really looked at her, except one. She didn't know that yet. The executive floor of Harmon Shipping sat on the 14th story of a glass tower in the financial district of New Orleans, where the old money lived alongside the new money, and both of them pretended not to know where the other came from. The building was owned, on paper, by a series of holding companies that traced back to an international investment firm registered in Luxembourg. That firm, if you knew where to look and were brave enough to look, traced back to one man, Ezra Harmon, not his real name. Not entirely. His mother had called him something softer, something from the old country that his men never used. To the city of New Orleans, he was Ezra Harmon, legitimate businessman, philanthropist, and occasional donor to the mayor's re-election campaign. To the people who moved money and cargo and information through the underbelly of the Gulf Coast, he was simply the Harmon, spoken like a weather system, like something that came from the horizon and couldn't be stopped. He was 41 years old, and he had buried 12 men who had tried to take what was his. He had not buried them metaphorically. May had seen him exactly 4 times in 3 years. Once in the elevator, where she had stared at the floor the entire ride, and he had said nothing. Once, through the glass wall of the boardroom, where she had been dropping off a corrected expense report, and he had been standing at the head of the table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, speaking quietly to 6 men who all looked afraid. Once at the company holiday party, which she had attended for exactly 45 minutes, before retreating to the parking garage. And once, this one she replayed sometimes, late at night, when she was tired enough to be honest with herself, in the hallway outside her office, at close to midnight, when she had looked up from a year-end reconciliation and found him standing in the doorway watching her. He had said, "You're still here," she had said. "I'm almost done." He had looked at her for a moment, really looked, in a way that made her want to check if she had ink on her face, and then he'd said, "Don't stay too late," and walked away. She had thought about it more times than she would ever admit. On the Thursday that everything changed, May was doing what she always did. Sitting in her office on the 9th floor, running the numbers that couldn't go through official channels, and pretending not to understand what they meant. She had her cardigan, the grey-blue one, her favorite, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and a Chopin nocturne playing low through her earbuds, because the silence of the building at night had a weight to it that she'd never quite gotten used to. She was cross-referencing a set of cargo manifests when she heard the door. Not the main door, the side door, the one that was supposed to be locked from outside after 6. She took out one earbud, listened, footsteps, more than one person. "It's nothing," she told herself. "It's security. It's the cleaning crew. It's... The office door swung open hard enough to bang against the wall, and May had about 2 seconds to register the man in the doorway before his arm was around her waist, and she was being hauled out of her chair. She did not scream. She bit down on the sound so hard, she nearly drew blood from her own lip. Her body understood before her mind did that screaming was not going to help her. "Don't," said the man holding her. His voice was low and flat and completely bored, like he did this the same way other men unclogged drains. "We just need you to come with us." Nice and quiet. There were 2 of them, one holding her, one by the door. The one by the door had his hands in his pockets and was looking around her office with the mild curiosity of someone at an open house. "What do you want?" May said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She was distantly proud of that. "We want the Pier 11 records," said the man by the door. He picked up the framed photo from her desk, her and her sister at Mardi Gras, 3 years ago, and set it back down. "The ones that aren't in the system." May's stomach turned to ice. Because she had those records, she had kept them the same way she kept all the dangerous things, quietly, carefully, filed under a label that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what to look for. She had kept them because someday, she had always told herself, someday they might be her way out if things went wrong. She had not anticipated that they might be the reason things went wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The man holding her tightened his grip. "Not violently, just a reminder. We know you're lying. You know we know." "The records, Miss Calloway," said the man by the door. He smiled at her. It did not reach his eyes. "And then we'll be on our way, and you can finish your coffee, and nobody has to be unhappy." She was quiet for 3 seconds. She was doing math, calculating odds, running the numbers the same way she always did. Only this time the variables were things like, how fast can I get to the door? And how many floors down is my car? And what happens if I give them what they want? The answer to that last one came to her quietly, and with total certainty. If you give them what they want, you are no longer useful. She kicked backward as hard as she could. The man behind her grunted and lost his grip for exactly 1 second, which was all she needed. She lurched toward the desk, grabbed the ceramic mug, and threw it at the face of the man by the door with the flat accuracy of someone who had played softball in high school and never quite lost the muscle memory. It hit him in the bridge of the nose. He made a sound that was not language. She ran. She made it 4 steps into the hallway before the first man caught her. He caught her by the arm and swung her around, and her shoulder hit the wall hard enough that she saw stars. And then her knees went, and she went with them, and the fluorescent lights blurred and swam. And the last thing she was clearly aware of before the darkness took her was the sound of her phone skittering across the floor. And, distantly, the faint light of the screen. She had pressed send. She didn't know who she'd called. She hoped it mattered. Ezra Harmon was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his house in the Garden District when his phone rang. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. He had made it that way, intentionally, because silence was one of the few things left that money couldn't buy everywhere, but could buy here. His study had bookshelves he actually read, bourbon he actually drank, and a desk that had belonged to his grandfather, who had built the family's first business from the docks of this same city, before it became something that required men with guns to protect. He looked at the screen, unknown number, but the location ping that came with it, his security system was patched into his phone in ways that were not legal and that he did not discuss. Placed it on the 9th floor of his building. His building, at 11:47 at night. He picked up, he heard breathing, and then a crash, and then a sound he had not heard in many years that he recognized immediately, and that did something very specific and very cold to the space behind his sternum. A woman, in pain. "Get me Dre," he said. He was already moving. "Get me the 9th floor on camera, and get me a car, now." His head of security, a former Army Ranger named Dre Coulter, had the footage pulled up on a tablet before the car reached the building. Ezra watched it once. He did not watch it twice. He did not need to. He had seen the footage of her sitting at her desk at 11:37. Cardigan, earbuds, coffee going cold the way it always did. And he had seen what happened at 11:42, and something in him that had been very carefully sealed for a very long time broke open in a way that felt like a physical thing, like a fault line giving way. "Two men," Dre said, "neither of them ours, black SUV in the parking structure. Plates are stolen. Who sent them?" It was not a question. Dre hesitated. "Patterns suggest Reeves. He's been making moves on the port contracts for 6 months. Reeves. Dale Reeves, who ran a mid-level operation out of Biloxi and had been reaching above his weight class for the better part of a year." Ezra had let it go. He had not considered that letting it go might suggest to Dale Reeves that certain things were unprotected. He would not make that mistake again. "Find the car," Ezra said. "Find her." May woke up in a warehouse. She knew it was a warehouse before she opened her eyes because of the smell, rust and brine and concrete that had soaked up decades of humidity, and because of the sound, which was the particular silence of a very large space with a very high ceiling. Her wrists were zip-tied to the arms of a chair. Her shoulder, where she'd hit the wall, was a deep, throbbing ache. Her head felt like something soft that had been treated unkindly. She opened her eyes. The warehouse was on the water. She could see the harbor through a row of clerestory windows near the roof, the lights of cargo ships floating in the dark. A single work light on a pole threw a circle of yellow around the chair where she sat. Outside the circle, dark shapes, voices, movement. 3 men that she could count, possibly more in the shadows. She made herself breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She took inventory. Zip ties, chair, concrete floor, water to her left. No visible exits from her position. Phone gone. No one who knew where she was except the man who had her. "Think," she told herself. "You're good at this. You do this with numbers every day. You find the pattern. You find the way through." The man from her office, the one with the nose she'd hit with the mug, now swollen magnificently, crouched in front of her chair. His name, she'd gathered from the conversation happening behind her, was Croft. He didn't look like someone named Croft. He looked like someone's disappointed uncle. "Here's the thing," Croft said. "We know you know where the records are. You just need to tell us, and this gets easy." "I already told you," May said. Her voice was very calm. She found it interesting that fear, taken to its absolute limit, stopped feeling like fear and started feeling like clarity. "I don't have any records. I run payroll. I do tax prep. I'm a bookkeeper." Croft sighed. "Lady, you're in a zip tie. This isn't the time, then untie me." He looked at her for a moment, and then, from somewhere in the dark at the edge of the warehouse, one of the other men said, "Croft." Just that, just the one word. But something about it made every person in the room go very still. Ezra had come through the service entrance. He had done it himself. Not because he didn't have men. He had brought 4, but because he had needed to, in the specific way that a man needs to walk through a fire himself when something of his is burning. Dre had tracked the SUV to a disused warehouse on the East Bank that nominally belonged to a shipping contractor and actually belonged to nobody who would answer questions about it. He came through the side. He had his gun. He had everything else he needed, which was the particular quality of stillness that comes to a man who has learned to move through dangerous places in the dark. He saw her the moment he cleared the interior door. She was sitting in the light, upright, chin lifted, eyes clear. Her shoulder was at an angle that meant it had hit something hard. There was a bruise coming up along her cheekbone that made something in his chest constrict with a fury so quiet and so total that it was almost peaceful. She was looking at the man crouched in front of her, and she was, as far as Ezra could tell, arguing. He had spent 3 years watching May Calloway make herself small and quiet and invisible in his building, and she was zip-tied to a chair in an East Bank warehouse and she was arguing. Something shifted in him that he didn't have a word for. He said, "Croft." What happened next happened quickly. Croft came up off his crouch. The two men by the wall reached for their weapons. Ezra's 4 men came through the doors they'd taken positions at, and there was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where the room hung on the edge of something very bad. And then Croft looked at Ezra's face and apparently decided that very bad was not a description that covered it. "Harmon," Croft said. His voice had changed. The bored flatness was gone. "We're not looking for trouble with you. We just need—" "I know what you need," Ezra said. He walked into the circle of light. He did not look away from Croft, but he was aware of May. Aware of her the way he was aware of the exits and the lines of sight. The way he was aware of everything in a room that mattered. "The records don't exist," Croft blinked. "What? There are no records." Ezra stopped about 3 feet from the chair. "The Pier 11 manifests were wiped 6 weeks ago. Whatever Reeves told you he'd find, he was wrong." A pause. He was also wrong to think this was going to work. The silence in the warehouse had a different quality now. May was looking at him. He could feel it. "You came here yourself," Croft said slowly, like he was working something out. "Yes, for a bookkeeper." Ezra looked at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Something about his silence and the expression on his face communicated everything that needed communicating. And Croft, who was not a stupid man, just a man who had made a very bad decision, took a step back. "The zip ties," Ezra said to Dre. Dre moved past him, pulled a blade, and May's hands were free in under 5 seconds. She brought them in front of her and pressed her fingers together, checking circulation, and Ezra watched her do it with the systematic efficiency of someone running a diagnostic. Her face was composed. She was shaking slightly. He could see it, the fine tremor in her hands. But she was holding herself together with both fists. Croft and his men left the warehouse without further negotiation. Ezra had made clear, in the way he made clear things that did not require speeches, that he would be in touch with Dale Reeves directly. May stood up from the chair. Her legs held. She was grateful for that, because she was not sure she could have handled them not holding. She straightened her cardigan. It was torn at the shoulder seam, and something about that specifically, about this one stupid domestic detail of a ruined piece of clothing, made her eyes sting for the first time all night. She pressed her fingers to the corner of her eye. Took a breath. "Mrs. Calloway." She turned. Ezra Harmon was standing 2 feet away from her. In the yellow worklight, he looked like he always looked. Like something carved from a material that regular life didn't touch. Like a man who had decided on a way of being and never been given a reason to revise it. Dark coat, dark eyes, the kind of face that had stopped being readable because he'd taught it to stop. Except, and she was probably imagining this, there was something in the set of his jaw that she hadn't seen before. "Are you injured?" he said. She thought about saying no. She always said no. She was very good at saying no. "My shoulder," she said instead. "I hit the wall." He nodded. He reached up, slowly, like he was being careful about it, and turned her chin with 2 fingers to look at the bruise on her cheek. His touch was so gentle that it surprised her. She had not thought of him as a man who had a gentle gear. "We're going to get that looked at," he said, not a question. "I'm fine. You were kidnapped and zip-tied to a chair. I know what happened to me." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. The ghost of something that might have been a smile in another life. "I know you do," he said. "I'm not arguing with you about your own experience. I'm telling you you're going to see a doctor." May looked at him. He looked back. He had the particular patience of a man who had decided something and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "Fine," she said. The doctor came to Harmon's house in the Garden District at 2 in the morning, and was apparently accustomed to this, because she asked no questions about context and treated May's shoulder. Soft tissue strain, nothing structural. And the bruise on her cheekbone with the brisk, thorough efficiency of someone who had a very specific professional arrangement. May sat in a chair in a room full of books and let herself be looked after. She was too tired to deflect. She was too wrung out to be embarrassed. She sat very still while the doctor pressed careful fingers along her shoulder, and she looked at the bookshelves. Actually read. She could tell. The spines cracked and soft, and she thought, "This is the strangest night of my life, and it isn't over yet." When the doctor left, Ezra came back in. He had taken off his jacket. He had his sleeves rolled up. She had seen this exactly once before, through a boardroom window, and he was carrying 2 glasses of water, like someone who wasn't quite sure what to do with his hands, which she found startling, because she had never imagined him uncertain about anything. He held out one of the glasses. She took it. He sat in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor for a moment before looking at her. "The records," he said, "the ones they were asking about." She was very still. "They're in the secondary server backup," she said, "under a file name called Archived Q2 Vendor Invoices. I know that's probably not what you want to hear." Ezra was quiet. "I kept them," she said, "not to use against you. I kept them in case I ever needed a way out. If something went wrong." She met his eyes. "I want you to know that I understand what they mean, and I have never told anyone, and I wasn't going to." "I know," he said. She blinked. "You know, I've had someone checking the access logs on those files for 2 years." He looked at her steadily. "You've opened them 3 times. Each time was to update the filing date, so they wouldn't auto-archive. That's not what someone does with leverage. That's what someone does when they want to make sure the information stays intact." She stared at him. He said, quietly, "You were keeping them safe." She hadn't thought of it that way. She thought about it now, and found that it was true, that somewhere under the exit strategy reasoning she'd told herself, what she had actually been doing was making sure the record was preserved. In case it mattered someday. In case someone needed to know. "You've always been like this," her sister used to say. "You collect things that matter. You just don't know what to do with them yet." "Why didn't you say something?" May said. "If you knew, why didn't you?" "Because you were safe," Ezra said. He said it like it was simple. "Because you were there and you were doing your work and you were—" He stopped. He looked at the glass in his hands. "Because I didn't want to give you a reason to leave." The room was very quiet. May looked at Ezra Harmon, who ran half the shipping infrastructure of the Gulf Coast, who had 12 dead men in his history, who had come through a warehouse door himself at midnight because her voice had come through a phone and something in him had moved. He was looking at the floor. He looked, in this specific moment, like a man who had just said something true and wasn't sure what to do with the fact that it was out in the world now. "You noticed me," she said. "You've never." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I spent 3 years trying to be invisible." "I know," he said. "You're very good at it." A pause. "It didn't work on me." She had no idea what her face was doing. She was too tired to manage it. "Why?" she said. He considered this for a moment. Not like he was calculating, like he was actually deciding how honest to be, which was different. "Because you see things," he said. "You sit in that office and you see everything that moves through this company, and you understand what it is. And you've never once, not once, in 3 years, made me feel like that understanding was a threat. You just kept the books clean, and you went home and you came back." He paused. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" She thought about all the mornings she had come in early, all the evenings she had stayed late, all the times she had quietly noted a discrepancy and fixed it without comment, had filed the things that needed filing and left untouched the things that needed to be left alone. She had thought of it as survival. She had thought of it as being very small and very careful. She had not thought of it as something that could be seen. "You notice people," her mother had said once. "You always have. You see them even when they think they're hiding." She hadn't known it went both ways. She slept in one of his guest rooms because it was 3 in the morning, and her shoulder hurt, and he had asked her, formally and a little stiffly, like he'd had to practice the words, if she would rather not be alone tonight. She had said yes before she could think better of it. She woke up in a bed with actual Egyptian cotton sheets and pale light coming through high windows, and she lay still for a moment and listened to the house. Quiet. The real kind, not the empty kind. She thought about Dale Reeves in Biloxi, and about Croft with his ruined nose, and about the feeling of her wrists being cut free, and a man crouching in front of her in the dark, who had not said, "Are you okay?" the way people say it when they don't want an honest answer, but had said, "Are you injured?" which was specific and real and meant something. She got up, found her cardigan draped over the chair where the doctor had left it, and went looking for coffee. She found Ezra in the kitchen. He had coffee already made, dark roast, the good kind, and he was at the island with a phone to his ear, speaking in the low, deliberate tone she recognized as his working voice. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved over her once, checking, she realized, the bruise, the shoulder, whether she was all right, and then he held up one finger and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." He hung up. "Dale Reeves," he said, "is going to have a very difficult morning." "Good," May said. Something crossed his face. Genuine surprise, she thought, like he'd expected her to soften it, to say something like, "You don't have to," or "I'm okay, really." She was too tired to perform forgiveness she didn't particularly feel. He poured her a cup of coffee without asking how she took it. Black, because she'd had it that way every day for 3 years, and apparently he had noticed that too, and slid it across the island to her. She picked it up. She looked at him over the rim. "I'm not going to pretend last night didn't happen," she said. "I'm not asking you to, and I'm not going to." She stopped. She chose her words. "I don't do well with being managed, with being told what I know and don't know, what I should and shouldn't think. If that's what this is going to be, it isn't," he said, flat, immediate. No hesitation. She looked at him. "I've watched you run this company's books for 3 years," he said. "I'd be an idiot to try to tell you what you know." A pause. "I'm also not going to apologize for what I do or what I've built. You already know what it is. You've known for years." "I know," she said. "And you're still here." She thought about that. She thought about the morning commute she'd taken for 3 years, about the job she'd told herself was temporary, and then told herself was practical. And then, somewhere around the 18th month, stopped telling herself anything about at all, because the truth was more complicated than the excuses. She thought about the elevator ride, and the boardroom window, and the hallway at midnight, and don't stay too late, and how she'd thought about it more than she should have. "I'm still here," she said. He held her gaze. "I'd like you to stay here," he said carefully. "In this building, for a few days, until I've dealt with Reeves and I know you're not a target. After that," he stopped. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who was navigating unfamiliar ground and knew it. "After that, I'd like to ask you something, if that's all right." May Calloway stood in the kitchen of a man who ran the underground infrastructure of New Orleans, and had come through a warehouse door at midnight for her, and she drank her coffee and she thought, "You spent 3 years learning to be invisible, and none of it worked, and maybe that's the most interesting thing that's ever happened to you." "Okay," she said. It was not a small word. They both knew it. Outside, the garden district was waking up. The light through the kitchen windows was the particular gold of a New Orleans morning, the kind that hit the old houses and the live oak trees and turned everything warm and amber and impossible to rush. Ezra Harmon looked at her like she was something he'd been waiting to say out loud for a very long time. And May looked back and did not make herself small, and the coffee was good. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not plan her exits.